The house that looked perfect. My name is Grace Bennett, and for most of my adult life I believed I was living inside a strong and peaceful home. From the outside, nothing about our family suggested danger. My husband, Thomas Bennett, was respected in our community. He dressed sharply, spoke with confidence, and carried himself like a man who had everything under control. Our daughter, Lily Bennett, was quiet, intelligent, and well-mannered. Neighbors often told me I was lucky. They said we were the picture of stability. And for years, I believed that too. But I have learned something painful about appearances. Sometimes the calmest houses hold the deepest silence. And sometimes silence is not peace. It is pressure building slowly, waiting for the moment it can no longer be contained. The change began so subtly that I almost missed it. Lily started spending more time in her room. She avoided sitting alone with her father. When Thomas entered the room, her posture shifted slightly, like someone bracing against cold air. I noticed these things, but I explained them away. Teenagers go through phases, I told myself. Thomas agreed. He said she was becoming dramatic, too sensitive, too emotional. I trusted him. After all, he was the steady one. He always sounded reasonable. He always had an explanation. That is how control often hides. It sounds like logic. It sounds like leadership. It sounds calm. Over time, small arguments between Thomas and Lily became more frequent. They were never loud enough for the neighbors to hear. Thomas believed in handling matters within the family. He would lower his voice instead of raising it, and somehow that made everything feel heavier. I would walk into the room and sense tension thick in the air, but both of them would go quiet the moment I appeared. "We're fine," Thomas would say with a smile. Lily would nod, though her eyes rarely matched her agreement. I convinced myself that if something serious were wrong, she would tell me. I believed that mothers always know. I was wrong. One evening, about 2 weeks before everything fell apart, I heard a sharp sound from downstairs. It was not loud, just sudden. When I reached the hallway, Thomas was standing near the basement door. Lily was at the bottom of the stairs, her face pale. "It's nothing," Thomas said quickly. She dropped a box. Lily said nothing. She simply walked past me and went upstairs. That night, I knocked on her bedroom door. I asked if she was okay. She forced a small smile and said she was tired. I accepted that answer because it was easier than pressing further. Looking back now, I realized that was the moment I chose comfort over truth. The basement had always been Thomas's space. He kept business files there. Important documents. Private matters. The door was usually locked. I never questioned it. I trusted him. Trust can be beautiful, but blind trust can also be dangerous. The following week, I noticed Thomas had not been coming upstairs during the day. I assumed he was working below. His phone often remained on the kitchen counter, silent and untouched. When I asked Lily if she had seen her father, she would answer carefully, as if choosing each word with caution. "He's downstairs," she would say. Her voice was steady, but something behind it felt tight. On the 9th day, I saw her carrying a tray of food toward the basement. I paused. "Why are you taking food down there?" I asked gently. She hesitated for a second before replying, "Dad's busy." The pause was small, but it felt heavy. My mind wanted to question further, yet my heart resisted. I told myself there was nothing to fear inside my own home. That night, as I lay awake, I realized how quiet the house had become. No footsteps from Thomas. No sound of television from the basement. Only stillness. A strange, unnatural stillness. I stood in the hallway and stared at the basement door. Something inside me whispered that I should open it. Something else warned me not to. I walked away. The next morning, Thomas's business partner called asking why he had missed meetings all week. Confusion tightened in my chest. I told him Thomas was working from home. When I ended the call, my hands were shaking. I turned slowly toward Lily, who was watching me from the kitchen doorway. There was fear in her eyes, but also determination. It was a look I had never seen before. "Mom," she said softly, "if you find out the truth, promise you'll listen." Those words unsettled me more than anything else. I asked her what she meant. She simply shook her head and walked away. By the 14th day, I could no longer ignore the unease crawling through me. The house felt different, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I approached the basement door again. This time, I placed my hand firmly on the handle. It was locked. I turned back and saw Lily standing behind me. Her expression was not wild or unstable. It was serious. Focused. Almost protective. "Mom," she whispered, "please don't open that door unless you're ready." My heart began pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "Ready for what?" I asked. She did not answer directly. Instead, she said something that would echo in my mind forever. "Sometimes the person you trust the most is the one you never really see." In that moment, I felt the ground shift beneath everything I believed about my family. I did not yet know that behind that locked door was a truth powerful enough to destroy the image of the perfect life I had spent years protecting. And I certainly did not know that by the time I understood why my daughter had done what she did, it would already be too late to undo the damage waiting below our feet. The door I finally opened. I stood there for what felt like hours, my hand resting on the cold metal handle of the basement door, my daughter's warning still echoing in my ears. The hallway felt narrower than usual, the air heavier, as if the house itself knew that something irreversible was about to happen. Lily did not move to stop me this time. She only watched, her breathing shallow but steady, like someone who had already accepted the consequences of a decision. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my head. For years, I had trusted Thomas without question. For years, I had believed that any tension in this house was simply normal family stress. But in that moment, something deeper pushed me forward. I reached into the drawer near the staircase and took out the spare key. My hands were trembling. "Mom," Lily said softly, not begging this time, just preparing me. "Whatever you see, please listen first." I did not answer her. I slid the key into the lock and turned it slowly. The sound of the mechanism clicking open felt louder than it should have. When I pulled the door open, a wave of stale air rose from below. The basement light was dim. The steps creaked as I descended. Each step felt like I was walking further away from the version of my life I thought I understood. At the bottom of the stairs, I saw him. Thomas Bennett, my husband, sitting against the wall. His wrists were tied loosely with rope. Not tight enough to hurt him, but firm enough to restrain him. His face looked tired, unshaven, but not injured. His eyes locked onto mine immediately. "Grace," he said, his voice hoarse but controlled, "thank God. She's not thinking clearly." For a moment, my mind wanted to accept that explanation. It would have been easier. Easier to believe my daughter had overreacted. Easier to believe this was some misunderstanding. But then I noticed something else. The ropes were tied in a way that allowed him slight movement. There were food containers stacked neatly in the corner. A blanket folded carefully beside him. This was not chaos. This was calculated. Lily stepped down behind me. She did not look angry. She did not look unstable. She looked exhausted. "Tell her the truth," she said calmly. Thomas laughed softly, shaking his head. "She's been under pressure. School, social stress." She snapped. His voice remained steady, persuasive, almost comforting. I had heard that tone before. It was the same tone he used during arguments when he wanted to end them quickly. The same tone that made everything sound reasonable. I turned to Lily. Why? I asked, my voice breaking under the weight of confusion. She swallowed. Because he wouldn't stop. Those words hung in the air. Thomas's expression shifted slightly, but only for a second. Stop what? I demanded. Lily looked at me directly. Controlling everything. Threatening me when you weren't home. Making me feel like I had no voice in my own house. Thomas shook his head immediately. Grace, you know me. I discipline her, yes. But that's called parenting. My mind felt like it was splitting in two. On one side stood the man I had loved and defended for 20 years. On the other stood my daughter, trembling but determined. I felt as if I were standing in the center of a storm with no clear direction to run. If you are watching this and you feel the tension rising, make sure you subscribe right now and hit the subscribe button, because this story only gets deeper and more shocking from here. And in the comment section, tell me which country you are watching from. I read the comments, and it always amazes me how these stories travel across the world. Now let me continue. I walked slowly around the basement, trying to process what I was seeing. There were no signs of violence. No chaos. Only silence and unfinished tension. How long? I asked quietly. Lily answered without hesitation. 2 weeks. My knees almost gave out. 2 weeks. For 14 days, my husband had been locked in this basement while I continued living above it, unaware. Or perhaps unwilling to see. Why didn't you call the police? I asked her. She hesitated. Because he would twist it. He always twists everything. I needed him to admit what he's been doing. Thomas's eyes hardened for the first time. This is insane, he said sharply. You're going to ruin this family over teenage drama. That sentence hit me harder than anything else. Ruin this family. The family image. The reputation. The outside world. For years, those had been priorities in this house. Suddenly, I began questioning everything I had ignored. I untied Thomas slowly. He stood up, rubbing his wrists, regaining composure almost instantly. Even in that moment, he looked controlled. Calm. Strategic. Lily stepped back but did not look afraid of him physically. She looked afraid of something deeper. Of not being believed. As we walked upstairs together, the house felt unfamiliar, like I was stepping into a stranger's home. I realized something terrifying then. The real conflict was not happening in the basement. It had been building quietly for years inside our silence. And now that the door was open, there was no closing it again. What I did not yet understand was that the truth was bigger than this single moment. Bigger than ropes and locked doors. And by the time I fully uncovered it, the damage would already be done. The journal that changed everything that night, after Thomas showered and went into our bedroom with the same calm composure he had always carried, I could not rest. The image of him sitting in the basement replayed in my mind, but even stronger than that was the image of Lily's face when she said, "Tell her the truth." It was not the face of someone angry. It was the face of someone who had been holding her breath for years. I waited until the house grew quiet before walking back downstairs. The basement no longer felt like storage space. It felt like a place where silence had been hiding. I turned on the dim light and slowly examined every corner. That was when I noticed a small notebook tucked behind an old box near the wall where Thomas had been sitting. My hands hesitated before reaching for it. Something inside me already knew that whatever was written inside would change everything. I opened it carefully. The first page was dated 3 years ago. "I don't know how to make Mom see," it began. My chest tightened instantly. I kept reading. The entries were not emotional explosions. They were calm, detailed, almost painfully thoughtful. Lily had written about conversations with her father when I was not home. She described how he would criticize her in private, then smile in public. She wrote about how he reminded her constantly that no one would believe her over him. He says he built this house. He says he decides what happens in it, one entry read. My heart began to race. I remembered Thomas saying those exact words before, but I had always heard them as pride, not power. Another page described a moment when Lily tried to argue back. She wrote that Thomas stood very close to her, speaking softly but firmly, telling her she was ungrateful and unstable. She wrote that he told her if she ever tried to damage his reputation, she would regret it. The words were not violent, but they carried weight. They carried fear. I sat down slowly on the cold basement step, feeling as if the ground beneath my marriage was cracking open. How many times had Lily tried to tell me something? How many times had I brushed it aside because Thomas sounded calmer? The pattern in the journal was clear. This was not a single argument. It was years of emotional pressure. Lily had written about feeling watched, controlled, measured. She described how Thomas would check her phone, question her friendships, and demand explanations for small decisions. When she pushed back, he would say she was overreacting. He would say she was dramatic. He would say she needed help. I felt sick. Those were the same words he had used earlier that evening when I found him downstairs. My mind replayed his steady voice telling me she had snapped. I realized something chilling. Thomas never raised his voice because he never needed to. His calmness was his strength. His control was quiet. And I had mistaken quiet for safety. As I turned another page, I found an entry written just 2 weeks ago. I recorded him today, it said. My breath caught. She explained that she had hidden a small recording device in the basement after confronting him about his behavior. She wrote that she needed proof because he always denied everything and made her question her own memory. He says I imagine things, she wrote. Sometimes I almost believe him. That sentence broke me. My daughter had been doubting her own reality. She had been questioning her own mind because the person in authority told her she was wrong. I heard footsteps behind me and quickly closed the notebook. Lily was standing at the bottom of the stairs, her expression guarded. You found it, she said quietly. I nodded slowly and handed it back to her. Why didn't you come to me with this? I asked, my voice softer than it had ever been. She looked down at the notebook in her hands. Because every time I tried to talk about Dad, you defended him before I could finish. The truth of that statement hurt more than any accusation. I had done that. Without thinking. Automatically. I thought if I had proof, you would have to believe me, she continued. That's why I locked him down here. I needed him to admit it while I recorded him. And did he? I asked carefully. She shook her head. He almost did. But then he saw the recorder. He smashed it against the wall. My eyes drifted toward a cracked device near the shelf that I had not noticed before. Everything began connecting in my mind. This had not been an act of cruelty. It had been desperation. I didn't know what else to do, Lily whispered. I felt trapped. I stepped closer to her and, for the first time in months, truly looked at my daughter. She was not rebellious. She was not unstable. She was tired. Tired of fighting alone. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked faintly. Thomas was awake. The house suddenly felt divided into sides. The image of our perfect family was collapsing quietly around us. I realized then that this was bigger than a basement door. Bigger than ropes and arguments. It was about control, silence, and the cost of not listening. I had finally opened the door downstairs, but now I understood that the real door I needed to open was the one between me and my daughter. And the longer I had kept it closed, the more damage had already been done. The knock at the door the next morning felt different from any other morning in our home. The sunlight came through the curtains just as it always had, but nothing felt warm. The air carried tension that could not be ignored anymore. I had barely slept. The journal's words echoed in my mind again and again. Thomas moved around the kitchen calmly, pouring coffee as if the previous night had been nothing more than a minor disagreement. Lily remained upstairs, quiet. I watched my husband carefully. For the first time in years, I was not simply listening to his words. I was studying his behavior. There was no panic in him. No visible anger. Only calculation. That frightened me more than shouting ever could. "Grace," he said smoothly, placing a cup in front of me, "we need to handle this carefully. Lily is confused. We should consider professional help for her before she hurts herself or someone else." The way he said it sounded reasonable. Logical. Protective. And yet something inside me no longer accepted it easily. I remembered the journal. I remembered how many times Lily had written about being called unstable. I set the cup down slowly. "I think we need outside clarity," I replied. His jaw tightened just slightly before he forced a nod. "If that makes you feel better," he answered. That small reaction confirmed something for me. Control weakens when light enters the room. I stepped away and called Michael Harris, our longtime family friend. Michael had known Thomas since college. He had watched Lily grow up. If anyone could give honest advice without panic, it would be him. When he arrived later that afternoon, the tension in the house thickened. Michael greeted Thomas warmly but noticed quickly that something was off. I explained everything carefully, leaving out nothing. The locked basement. The journal. The broken recorder. Michael listened without interruption. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled slowly. "This isn't something you solve alone," he said. Thomas immediately protested. "You can't be serious. Calling authorities over teenage exaggeration will destroy our reputation." There it was again. Reputation. Image. What people would think. I noticed Michael's eyes narrow slightly at that word. "If everything is a misunderstanding," Michael replied calmly, "then you have nothing to fear from a proper conversation with professionals." Silence filled the room. For the first time, Thomas did not have a quick answer. That was when I made the decision. I called the police station and asked for guidance. By early evening, Detective Samuel Brooks arrived at our home. He was not aggressive. He was not dramatic. He walked in quietly, observing everything with steady eyes. He shook Thomas's hand firmly and greeted Lily gently when she came downstairs. He asked to speak with each of us separately. When it was my turn, I explained the situation honestly. I admitted that I had ignored signs. I admitted that I did not know what was true anymore. Detective Brooks listened carefully and asked thoughtful questions about patterns, not just events. "Has there been a history of control?" he asked. That word hit hard. Control. I described what I had read in the journal. I described Thomas's calm but dominant presence. The detective nodded slowly. "Control does not always look loud," he said. "Sometimes it is quiet and consistent." When he spoke to Lily, she brought the journal with her. She explained everything in a steady voice, even when her hands trembled slightly. Detective Brooks examined the broken recording device in the basement. He took notes. He asked Thomas direct questions about specific dates written in the journal. Thomas denied the accusations with confidence, but for the first time, his voice lost a small measure of its smoothness. The detective's approach was patient. He did not accuse. He did not assume. He simply observed contradictions. After several hours, he gathered us together in the living room. "This situation requires careful investigation," he said calmly. "But I can tell you this. When patterns appear over years, they deserve serious attention. Thomas shifted in his seat. Lily looked at me, searching my face. I felt something inside me changing permanently. I was no longer standing in the middle trying to protect both sides. I was beginning to understand that neutrality can sometimes support the stronger voice. And the stronger voice in our home had always been Thomas's. As Detective Brooks prepared to leave, he turned to me. "Mrs. Bennett," he said gently, "truth has a way of surfacing when people feel safe enough to speak." After he walked out, the house felt different again. Not peaceful. Not chaotic. But exposed. The image of perfection we had protected for so long was cracking under pressure. Thomas retreated upstairs without another word. Lily remained seated beside me. I reached for her hand, and this time she did not pull away. I realized then that this was no longer about what the neighbors would think. It was about whether my daughter would ever feel safe in her own home again. And that was a question I could no longer afford to ignore. When the truth finally spoke, the days that followed felt longer than any days I had ever lived. Our house no longer felt like a home, it felt like a place under quiet inspection. Detective Samuel Brooks returned twice during that week. Each visit brought more questions, more careful conversations, and more moments where the silence between us revealed more than words ever could. Thomas continued to present himself as calm and cooperative. He dressed neatly, spoke respectfully, and answered every question with steady confidence. If someone had walked into the room without context, they would have believed him instantly. That had always been his strength. But something had changed inside me. I was no longer listening only to his tone. I was listening to the pattern. Detective Brooks had requested access to Thomas's old phone backups and laptop records. At first, Thomas resisted slightly, saying it was unnecessary and invasive. But resistance only deepened suspicion. When the digital records were reviewed, fragments of deleted messages surfaced. They were not explosive threats. They were subtle lines layered with pressure. Messages reminding Lily that she owed him respect because he paid for everything. Messages suggesting she was too emotional and needed to keep family matters private. Messages warning her not to embarrass the family with false impressions. Reading those words felt like slowly removing a blindfold. The control had not been loud or violent. It had been quiet, constant, and strategic. Detective Brooks sat with us one final evening to summarize his findings. "There is clear evidence of long-term emotional manipulation," he explained carefully. "While there may not be physical harm, emotional control can deeply impact a young person's well-being." Thomas's composure cracked for the first time. "I was disciplining my daughter," he argued, his voice sharper than before. "Parents correct their children." Detective Brooks remained steady. "Correction guides. Control isolates." That sentence settled heavily into the room. Lily sat beside me, her posture tense but upright. For the first time, she was not shrinking. She was present. The investigation did not end with dramatic arrests or shouting. Instead, it concluded with protective measures and legal boundaries. Thomas was required to attend counseling sessions. Temporary separation was strongly recommended. And most importantly, Lily's voice was officially documented and acknowledged. It was not revenge she wanted. It was validation. That night, after everyone had left and the house grew quiet again, I sat alone in the living room. The same walls that once represented stability now felt honest for the first time. I thought about the years I had mistaken calm for safety. I thought about how often I had interrupted Lily when she tried to speak. I remembered every time I defended Thomas automatically because it was easier than confronting the possibility that something was wrong. The hardest truth I faced was not that my husband had controlled our daughter. The hardest truth was that I had not listened soon enough. I had discovered the reality beneath our perfect image, but I had discovered it late. And that delay had cost my daughter years of peace. Lily walked downstairs quietly and sat beside me. "Are we going to be okay?" she asked softly. I looked at her carefully. There was still hurt in her eyes, but there was also relief. "We will rebuild," I answered honestly. "But rebuilding takes truth." She leaned her head gently on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but it meant more than any apology. Over the following weeks, Thomas moved out temporarily. Counseling sessions began. Conversations, once avoided, were finally spoken openly. Healing was not instant. Trust does not return overnight. But something important had shifted. The silence that once protected control no longer ruled our home. I learned something powerful through all of this. Control can hide behind politeness. Manipulation can wear a calm smile. And sometimes the people we trust the most can quietly reshape our reality without raising their voice. But I also learned something hopeful. When someone finally speaks, even after years of silence, that voice deserves to be heard. Lily did not lock her father in the basement because she was cruel. She acted out of desperation. She felt unheard and trapped. While her choice was extreme, it came from a place of fear and exhaustion. And as her mother, my responsibility was not to defend appearances. It was to protect truth. If there is one lesson I want anyone listening to this story to understand, it is this: do not ignore patterns simply because they are quiet. Pay attention when someone you love changes in ways that do not feel natural. Ask deeper questions. Listen fully before responding. Sometimes the most dangerous situations are not loud. They are subtle and consistent. As for our family, we are still healing. There are scars, yes. But there is also awareness now. And awareness is the beginning of freedom. I discovered the truth later than I should have, but I am grateful I discovered it at all. Because once truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. And once a voice is validated, it becomes stronger. If this story touched you, or if it made you reflect on something in your own life, make sure you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. There are more powerful stories coming, stories that explore family, truth, resilience, and the hidden realities many people are afraid to talk about. And in the comment section, tell me what lessons stood out most to you. Your voice matters here. Also, let me know which country you are watching from. It always amazes me how these stories travel across the world and connect people through shared experiences. Thank you for staying until the end of this journey with Grace, Lily, and even Thomas. Sometimes stories are not meant to shock us. They are meant to wake us up. Stay with us for the next story.